They ruled vast empires, their names synonymous with power, tradition, and dynastic duty. The Habsburgs, a family known for strict protocols, arranged marriages, and a porcelain facade. But beneath the glittering surface of their imperial palaces, forbidden passions simmered, rebellious spirits yearned for freedom, and some dared to love in ways that shattered every convention. These are the shocking true stories of Habsburg royals who risked everything, tearing up the royal rulebook in pursuit of a love, a life, or a freedom that was entirely their own. Number 1. The Archduchess, who chose a quiet life. Archduchess Marie Valerie of Austria was born into a world of immense privilege, yet also suffocating expectation. She was the youngest daughter of Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elisabeth, often called Sisi. Her mother, Sisi, was famously elusive, obsessed with beauty and freedom, rarely present in the traditional sense, but Marie Valerie was different. She was her mother's favorite, her only child, as Sisi often called her, perhaps because Marie Valerie was the only one. Sisi had raised herself. After her first 3 children were mostly cared for by her mother-in-law, Marie Valerie was known for her down-to-earth nature, her intelligence, and her deep desire for a normal family life, a concept almost alien to Habsburg royalty. From an early age, Marie Valerie rejected the superficiality of court life. She preferred simple clothes, country walks, and the company of her beloved dogs to grand balls and formal receptions. Her siblings, Crown Prince Rudolf and Archduchess Gisela, seemed destined for the typical arranged royal marriages, alliances that served political rather than personal ends. Marie Valerie, however, held a quiet but firm determination to marry for love, a radical idea for an archduchess. Her mother, perhaps influenced by her own unhappy marriage and longing for freedom, supported this unusual wish. Sisi wanted Marie Valerie to have the happy personal life she felt she had been denied. Many suitors from powerful European houses presented themselves. There were princes from Saxony, Bavaria, and even Portugal, each promising a grand future, a glittering throne, and a politically advantageous union. But Marie Valerie dismissed them all. Her heart was not swayed by titles or vast territories. She sought something deeper, a connection of souls, a shared life of genuine affection. This was an unprecedented stance for a Habsburg archduchess of her standing, a quiet defiance of centuries of dynastic tradition. Her decision baffled many at court, who saw marriage as a transaction, not a romance. Then at a ball in 1886 she met Archduke Franz Salvator of Austria-Tuscany. He was a distant cousin, a member of a less prominent branch of the Habsburg family. He was not a future king, nor did he command vast armies. He was merely a young man of good character, handsome, with a cheerful disposition and a genuine love for nature, much like Marie Valerie herself. Their connection was immediate and undeniable. They shared interests, a sense of humor, and a mutual aversion to the stuffiness of court. It was a simple, pure attraction, something utterly unconventional in a world where royal unions were dictated by treaties and territorial gains. Their courtship was discreet but heartfelt. They spent hours together away from the prying eyes of the Viennese court, walking in gardens, sharing books, and simply enjoying each other's company. Marie Valerie found in Franz Salvator a quiet strength, a warmth, and a directness that was refreshing after the intricate web of courtly hypocrisy. He saw in her not just an archduchess, but a sensitive, intelligent woman who longed for a life of purpose and affection. When Marie Valerie announced her intention to marry Franz Salvator, there was predictable uproar. Emperor Franz Joseph, ever the traditionalist, was initially hesitant. He understood the strategic importance of a high-status marriage, but Empress Elisabeth, with her unyielding support, championed her daughter's cause. Sisi used her considerable influence, and her husband's deep affection for her to persuade him. She reminded him of her own desire for freedom, and how she wanted her daughter to avoid the same gilded cage. After much discussion, and perhaps a sigh of resignation, the emperor gave his reluctant blessing. The engagement was announced in December 1888. It was a triumph of personal will over dynastic expectation, a quiet revolution in the Habsburg court. The wedding took place on July 31st, 1890, at Ischl, a favorite summer residence of the imperial family. It was a relatively modest affair for a royal wedding, reflecting Marie Valerie's preference for simplicity. She wore a white gown, not heavily encrusted with jewels, and her joy was clear for all to see. Their marriage was, for the time, an anomaly. They chose to live away from the constant scrutiny of the Hofburg Palace in Vienna. They settled in Schloss Waldsee, a charming castle on the Danube River, which Franz Joseph gifted them. Here, Marie Valerie and Franz Salvator created a life that was profoundly different from that of other Habsburgs. Their home became a sanctuary filled with warmth, laughter, and the joyful chaos of a growing family. They welcomed 10 children: Franz Karl Salvator, Hedwig, Theodor Salvator, Gertrude, Marie Elisabeth, Ovazist Franziska, Elois Salvator, and Maria Theresia. Marie Valerie devoted herself to her role as a wife and mother. She personally oversaw the children's education, nursed them through illnesses, and spent countless hours playing with them in the gardens of Waldsee. She kept meticulous diaries, which reveal a woman deeply content with her lot, a stark contrast to the often melancholic and restless entries of her mother. Franz Salvator was a loving and supportive husband, sharing her commitment to family life. He was a doting father, often seen playing with his children, a sight rarely witnessed among the more formal, imperial fathers of the era. Their life at Waldsee was marked by a quiet rhythm of domesticity and philanthropy. Marie Valerie was actively involved in local charities, establishing hospitals and schools, earning the affectionate nickname the Angel of Waldsee from the local population. They embraced a relatively frugal lifestyle compared to other royals managing their estate efficiently and living within their means. This was another form of quiet defiance, rejecting the excessive opulence often associated with their station. They found happiness in simple pleasures: long walks, gardening, reading, and the company of their large, boisterous family. This decision to prioritize personal happiness and a private family life over the grandeur and political machinations of the court was a significant departure from Habsburg norms. While many of her relatives pursued power, scandal, or retreated into melancholy, Marie Valerie forged a path of quiet contentment. Her defiance was not loud or rebellious, but rather a steadfast refusal to conform to the expected unhappiness of royal life. She proved that a Habsburg could choose love, build a genuine family, and find joy outside the suffocating grip of imperial expectations. Her story remains a testament to the power of a quiet will to defy convention, choosing a fulfilling life over a glittering but empty crown. Number 2. The Empress who loved freedom more than any man. Empress Elisabeth of Austria, famously known as Sisi, was a figure of breathtaking beauty and profound mystery. Born a duchess in Bavaria, she was plucked from a relatively free and unconventional childhood at Posenhofen to become the wife of Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria at the tender age of 16. From the moment she stepped into the stifling grandeur of the Hofburg Palace, it became clear that Sisi was a wild bird trapped in a gilded cage. Her entire life was a defiance of the role imposed upon her, and her greatest love was not for her husband, her children, or her empire, but for an elusive, unattainable freedom. The marriage itself was supposed to be a love match, at least for Franz Joseph, who fell instantly for his charming, spirited cousin. But for Sisi, the transition to empress was a nightmare. She detested court protocol, the endless ceremonies, the constant surveillance, and the rigid expectations placed upon her. Her mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie, was a formidable figure who dictated every aspect of Sisi's life, from her dress to her daily schedule. Sisi found solace only in solitude, in nature, and in the pursuit of perfection, particularly in her physical appearance. And her equestrian skills, her defiance of convention began subtly. She refused to eat certain foods, adopting extreme diets to maintain her famously slender waist. She spent hours having her incredibly long dark hair dressed, a process that could take an entire day. But these were not merely vanity. They were acts of control, in a life where she felt she had none. She found escape in riding, often galloping wildly across the countryside, pushing herself and her horses to their limits. This was not a pastime for a lady, let alone an empress, yet Sisi pursued it with a fierce passion that left courtiers aghast. As her initial youthful exuberance faded under the pressure, Sisi grew increasingly restless and melancholic. She developed a profound wanderlust, traveling constantly, often for months at a time across Europe. She visited England, Ireland, Corfu, Hungary, and other far-flung destinations, always searching for a sense of peace and anonymity she could never find in Vienna. These long absences were scandalous. An empress was expected to be at her husband's side, to produce heirs and to host state functions. Sisi did none of these with regularity or enthusiasm. Her travels were not diplomatic missions. They were desperate quests for personal liberation. Her relationship with Emperor Franz Joseph, though respectful and occasionally affectionate, was strained by her perpetual absence and her deep-seated unhappiness. He loved her deeply, in his quiet, traditional way, and tried to understand her, but he could never truly grasp her longing for a life outside the strictures of royalty. Sisi, for her part, could not give him the conventional wifely devotion he desired. Her spirit was simply too untamed for the role of a dutiful empress. Sisi found companions who shared her unconventional spirit, or at least tolerated her eccentricities. She cultivated friendships with poets and intellectuals, including Ludwig II of Bavaria, the Mad King, with whom she shared a bond of melancholy and a love for beauty. She surrounded herself with readers and equerries, often young, attractive men, who provided intellectual stimulation and served as companions on her solitary journeys. While there is no definitive proof of romantic affairs, these close relationships, particularly with her Greek reader, Constantine Christomanos, were certainly unconventional for an empress. She sought connection and understanding outside the rigid confines of her marriage and court. Perhaps her most unconventional love story was with Hungary. Feeling a kinship with the spirited, independent nature of the Hungarian people, Sisi learned their difficult language, championed their cause for greater autonomy within the empire, and spent significant time at her beloved Godolo Palace. This was a political act, but also a deeply personal one, driven by her yearning for a place where she felt understood and accepted. Her passionate advocacy for Hungary against the initial wishes of her own imperial court was a daring defiance of established policy. Sisi's defiance extended to her very image. As she aged, she became increasingly obsessed with maintaining her youthful beauty. Viewing it as her only true form of power, she commissioned photographs of herself at her peak beauty and refused to be photographed publicly again. In her later years, she covered her face with a fan or a veil, literally hiding from the public eye, a final act of control over her own narrative and body. She became a reclusive, almost spectral figure, haunting the edges of her own empire. Her love for independence eventually became a form of self-imposed exile. She lived life on her own terms, traveling relentlessly, writing poetry filled with longing and despair, and pursuing an almost monastic dedication to physical fitness. Her pursuit of freedom led her to embrace dangerous activities, like challenging rides and long solitary walks in remote areas. She was a woman who seemingly could have anything, yet she craved the one thing she could not possess: true, unfettered freedom from her imperial identity. Sisi's life was a testament to a person's struggle against an imposed destiny. She was an empress who never wanted the crown, a wife who longed for solitude, and a mother who struggled with conventional attachments. Her pursuit of freedom, her constant movement, and her refusal to conform to the role society carved out for her were her ultimate acts of defiance. Her story is not a traditional romance, but a profound, lifelong love affair with the concept of liberation. A love that ultimately defined her and set her apart from every other royal of her time. Her tragic end, assassinated by an anarchist in Geneva in 1898, underscored the constant tension between her desire for freedom and the world that refused to let her be truly free. She died a victim of political violence, but her life was a continuous battle for personal liberty. Number 3. The prince who vanished for love, Archduke Johann Salvator of Austria, was a man born into the highest echelons of European royalty, a cousin to Emperor Franz Joseph himself. Yet his life would take a turn so dramatic, so unconventional, that it remains one of the greatest mysteries of the Habsburg dynasty. Johann Salvator was a restless spirit, intelligent, Médoc, and deeply frustrated by the suffocating constraints of his royal lineage. He was a gifted sailor, a talented musician, and a man with progressive political views far removed from the conservative world of the Viennese court. From an early age, Johann Salvator felt stifled by the expectations placed upon him as a Habsburg archduke. He found military service, restrictive court life tedious, and the prospect of an arranged, politically advantageous marriage utterly unappealing. He longed for a life of freedom, adventure, and genuine connection. A life far removed from the gilded cage of imperial duty. This desire for authenticity set him apart from most of his royal relatives who embraced their roles. However reluctantly his unconventional path became apparent early on. He openly criticized the imperial military, advocating for reforms that were considered radical. His outspoken nature and his liberal leanings made him an outsider at court, often clashing with his more traditional relatives, including his powerful cousin, the emperor. He was seen as a maverick, a black sheep of the family, increasingly alienated by the rigid hierarchy and pomp. Then he met Ludmilla Stubel. She was an opera dancer, a woman from a common background, a profession considered scandalous and utterly unsuitable for a royal liaison, let alone a potential marriage, in the conservative Habsburg society. Their relationship began discreetly, hidden from the prying eyes of the court, but their connection deepened, evolving into a profound and passionate love. Ludmilla was spirited, independent, and shared Johann Salvator's love for life and adventure. She offered him a glimpse of a world beyond the confines of royalty, a world where personal freedom and genuine affection held more value than titles and inherited status. Their love was a direct challenge to the very foundations of the Habsburg family. A marriage between an archduke and a commoner was simply unthinkable, a breach of sacred dynastic laws. Johann Salvator knew that if he wanted to be with Ludmilla, he would have to make an impossible choice: his royal life or his beloved, and he chose love. In January 1889, in a move that stunned the entire European aristocracy, he formally renounced his title as Archduke Johann Salvator of Austria, his membership in the imperial house, and all his associated rights. He adopted the simple name Johann Orff after a castle he owned. This act was an unprecedented defiance of convention, a complete rejection of his birthright. Never before had a Habsburg of his standing willingly abandoned everything for love and freedom. He was effectively cutting himself off from one of the most powerful families in Europe, willingly stepping out of the spotlight and into an uncertain future. The court was aghast. Emperor Franz Joseph deeply displeased, but Johann Orff was resolute. He married Ludmilla Stubel in a quiet civil ceremony in London in 1889, defying not just royal protocol, but the very notion of a Habsburg prince. After their marriage, Johann Orff and Ludmilla embarked on a new life together, one of adventure and anonymity. He purchased a merchant ship, renamed it the St. Margaret, and planned to sail the world seeking a true life of freedom. he learned to navigate, to operate a commercial vessel, embracing the practicalities of a life he had chosen far from the gilded salons of Vienna. Ludmilla was by his side, a devoted partner in his audacious quest for a different existence. In March 1890, the St. Margaret set sail from Hamburg, bound for South America. Johann Orth served as the ship's captain, and Ludmilla was his companion. They lived as ordinary citizens, free from the crushing weight of their past identities. They stopped in Buenos Aires, where they were briefly recognized, but then continued their journey, sailing south along the treacherous coast of Patagonia, and then they vanished. The St. Margaret was last seen in July 1890, off the coast of Valparaiso, Chile, heading towards Cape Horn, one of the most dangerous shipping routes in the world. A fierce storm was reported in the area around that time. No trace of the ship, its crew, Johann Orth, or Ludmilla Stubel, was ever found. They simply disappeared, swallowed by the vast unforgiving ocean. The official story was that they were lost at sea, victims of the elements, but the mystery surrounding their disappearance quickly fueled speculation. Did they truly perish in the storm? Or did Johann Orth, with his desire for ultimate freedom and anonymity, orchestrate a disappearance, perhaps even faking their deaths to escape the last vestiges of his royal past? Rumors persisted for years, whispers of sightings in remote South American towns, tales of a man resembling the former Archduke, living under a new identity. Some believed he successfully created the life he craved, free from the Habsburg name. The emperor officially declared Johann Orth dead in 1911, 2 decades after his disappearance. But the truth of their fate remains an enduring enigma. Johann Salvator and Ludmilla Stubel chose love and freedom over power and privilege, challenging the very essence of royal existence. Their story is a powerful testament to a love so profound it led a prince to abandon his crown, and perhaps to sail into a mysterious unknown, defying convention. Until the very end. Number 4. The Tragic Prince and His Forbidden Obsession. Crown Prince Rudolf of Austria was the only son of Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elisabeth, destined to inherit the vast Habsburg Empire. He was intelligent, Medic, and possessed a keen interest in science and progressive politics, much like his cousin Johann Salvator. But beneath the surface of this promising heir lay a profound melancholy and a rebellious spirit that constantly clashed with his father's conservative rule. Rudolf felt trapped by his destiny, his liberal ideas stifled by the rigid imperial court. His life was a constant struggle between duty and a burning desire for personal freedom and intellectual fulfillment. His arranged marriage to Princess Stephanie of Belgium, though initially promising, quickly soured. They shared little in common, and Rudolf, already restless, found himself increasingly unhappy and seeking solace outside his marital vows. He became known for his numerous affairs, a common practice for royals of the era, but Rudolf's pursuits were driven by a deeper loneliness and a desperate search for connection. He indulged in hunting, writing, and passionate, often clandestine romantic entanglements, further alienating him from the strict moral code of his father's court. His political views became increasingly radical, openly clashing with the emperor. Rudolf believed the monarchy needed to modernize, to embrace social reforms, and to prepare for a change in Europe. His father, resistant to change, saw his son's ideas as dangerous and disloyal. This chasm between father and son deepened Rudolf's sense of isolation and despair. He felt powerless, trapped, and utterly alone in a world that seemed determined to crush his spirit. Then, in late 1888, Rudolf met Baroness Marie Valerie. She was a 17-year-old noblewoman, beautiful, vivacious, and utterly captivated by the melancholic crown prince. Mary, though young, was ambitious and perhaps drawn to the dangerous thrill of an illicit affair with the heir to the throne. Their connection was immediate and intense, quickly blossoming into a passionate, all-consuming obsession. For Rudolf, Mary represented an escape, a fiery distraction from his crushing despair. For Mary, Rudolf was the forbidden prince, offering an intoxicating taste of power and romance. Their affair was deeply scandalous even by the lax standards of the imperial court. Mary was far too young and Rudolf was a married man. But they carried on their secret rendezvous with reckless abandon, exchanging passionate letters and meeting in hidden apartments. Their relationship was not merely a fleeting romance. It became a dark, intertwined obsession, fueled by Rudolf's growing depression and Mary's unwavering, almost desperate devotion. Rudolf's mental state deteriorated rapidly in the months leading up to January 1889. He spoke of suicide, of escaping his miserable existence, and made vague plans for a joint death with a lover. He was increasingly isolated, his political ambitions thwarted, his personal life in disarray, and his health declining. He saw no way out of his gilded cage, believing that only death could offer him true freedom. On the night of January 29, 1889, Rudolf and Mary traveled to his remote hunting lodge at Merling, deep in the Vienna woods. They were accompanied only by Rudolf's valet and a coachman. What transpired in the cold, isolated lodge remains shrouded in mystery and speculation. But the official account, carefully crafted by the imperial court, tells a shocking story of forbidden love and despair. In the early morning hours of January 30th, 1889, Crown Prince Rudolf shot Marie Valerie, killing her instantly. Then he turned the gun on himself. Both were found dead in his bedchamber in what appeared to be a suicide pact. The discovery sent shockwaves through the empire and across Europe. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, the future emperor, had died in a scandalous double suicide with his teenage mistress. The imperial court, desperate to contain the scandal, immediately launched a massive cover-up. The bodies were quickly removed, the scene altered, and a fabricated story released to the public. Initially, it was announced that Rudolf had died of a heart attack. Later, a more elaborate lie emerged. Rudolf had suffered from a temporary fit of insanity, leading him to kill Mary and then himself. Marie Valerie's body was hastily buried in secret. Her family ordered to disappear. Her name was almost erased from public record. Despite the court's efforts, rumors and whispers spread like wildfire. The true, horrifying nature of the deaths at Merling could not be fully contained. The tragedy devastated Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elisabeth, plunging the imperial family into deep mourning and forever scarring them. Elizabeth, already prone to melancholy, became even more reclusive and distant. The Merling incident epitomized the ultimate defiance of convention. It was not just an illicit affair. It was a desperate dark act that challenged the very foundations of morality, religion, and dynastic succession. A future emperor had chosen death over duty, a forbidden love over his crown. The events at Merling ripped apart the facade of imperial stability, foreshadowing the eventual collapse of the Habsburg monarchy. The true motivations behind the suicide pact remain debated by historians to this day. Was it solely a romantic tragedy, or was it a desperate political act by a prince who saw no other escape? Was Mary a willing participant, or a victim of Rudolf's despair? Regardless of the precise answers, the story of Crown Prince Rudolf and Marie Valerie stands as a chilling testament to a love that defied all boundaries, leading to a tragic end that shook an empire to its core and remains one of the most haunting and scandalous chapters in Habsburg history. Number 5. The heir who shook an empire for love. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph, and after the tragic death of Crown Prince Rudolf at Merling, he became the heir presumptive to the vast Austro-Hungarian Empire. A position of immense power and responsibility, it also came with rigid rules, particularly regarding marriage. The Habsburg tradition dictated that an heir could only marry a princess from a reigning or formerly reigning European dynasty, ensuring the continuation of a pure royal bloodline and solidifying political alliances. But Franz Ferdinand, a stubborn, often difficult yet deeply principled man, was about to shatter centuries of tradition for a love that shook an entire empire. Franz Ferdinand was a complex character, He was devoted to his family, a passionate hunter, and deeply conservative in many of his views. Yet, beneath his gruff exterior, he harbored a fierce loyalty and a capacity for profound affection. He had been ill for a period, suffering from tuberculosis, and during his recovery he often sought solace and companionship. In 1894 he met Countess Sophie Chotek von Chotkako und Wageni. Sophie was a Bohemian aristocrat, intelligent, charming, and a lady-in-waiting to Archduchess Isabella, the wife of Franz Ferdinand's aunt. She was from an ancient noble family, but crucially she was not of reigning princely blood. This distinction made any romantic entanglement with the heir to the throne absolutely forbidden by the strict Habsburg house laws. Their relationship began discreetly cultivated during Franz Ferdinand's visits to Archduchess Isabella's home. At first, no one suspected the Archduke's true intentions. It was assumed he was interested in one of Isabella's many daughters, a suitable match for the future emperor. For years, Franz Ferdinand and Sophie maintained their secret romance, their love growing stronger with each stolen moment. They knew the immense obstacles they faced, but their bond deepened, becoming an unbreakable commitment. The secret was finally discovered in 1898 by Archduchess Isabella herself. She stumbled upon a locket containing Sophie's photograph in Franz Ferdinand's possession. Thinking it was meant for one of her daughters, the revelation sent shockwaves through the imperial family and the entire court. The heir presumptive, the future emperor, was in love with a mere countess. Emperor Franz Joseph was furious. He absolutely forbade the match. The idea of a morganatic marriage for the heir was an unthinkable breach of dynastic honor and stability. A morganatic marriage meant that, while the marriage itself was legal, the spouse and any children born from the union would not inherit the titles, privileges, or property of the higher-ranking partner. For the future emperor, it meant his children would never ascend to the throne. Endangering the very succession of the Habsburg dynasty, Franz Ferdinand, however, was unyielding. He declared that he would rather give up his right to the throne than give up Sophie. He faced intense pressure from all sides: his uncle the emperor, cabinet ministers, other archdukes, and the entire court. They tried to persuade him, threatened him, even send Sophie away, but Franz Ferdinand stood firm. He loved Sophie profoundly and refused to marry anyone else. He was prepared to sacrifice his imperial destiny for her. The standoff lasted for years, creating immense tension within the imperial family. Franz Ferdinand, known for his stubbornness, simply would not back down. Finally, Emperor Franz Joseph, recognizing his nephew's unwavering resolve and the potential for a succession crisis if Franz Ferdinand refused to marry at all, reluctantly agreed to the marriage, but on draconian terms. On June 28, 1900, at the Hofburg Palace, Franz Ferdinand was forced to sign a solemn declaration before the emperor, all archdukes, cardinals, and ministers. In this humiliating ceremony, he formally swore that Sophie would never bear the title of Empress, Queen, or Archduchess. Her children would never have dynastic rights to the throne and would not be allowed to display imperial coats of arms. It was a public shaming designed to underscore the absolute disapproval of their union. Sophie would be granted the title of Princess of Hohenberg, and later Duchess of Hohenberg, but she would always be relegated to a lower status at court, constantly reminded of her unworthiness. The wedding took place on July 1st, 1900, at Reichstadt, in Bohemia. A quiet ceremony, attended only by Franz Ferdinand's stepmother and half-sisters, pointedly excluding Emperor Franz Joseph and the rest of the imperial family. Sophie walked down the aisle, alone, a clear symbol of her isolated position. This was a love story, born of defiance, but also marked by profound sacrifice and constant discrimination. Their life together at Konopiste Castle near Prague and at Artstetten Castle was remarkably happy and devoted. They had 3 children. Sophie Maximilian and Ernst Franz Ferdinand was a doting father. He cherished Sophie, who brought him immense comfort and stability. Away from the formal court, they created a warm, family-centered life, a stark contrast to the rigid imperial environment. Sophie though excluded from many royal functions and often suffering public slights, bore her burden with dignity and grace. Despite their deep love, the court's rejection of Sophie continued. At public events, she was never allowed to ride in the imperial carriage with Franz Ferdinand. She could not sit in the royal box at the opera. She was forced to enter events separately and stand lower in rank than even the youngest archduchess. These constant humiliations were a source of deep pain for Franz Ferdinand, who fiercely protected his wife and children. He never forgave his family for their treatment of Sophie. Their love story, born of defiance, tragically culminated in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. Franz, Ferdinand, and Sophie were on an official visit to the Bosnian capital. Despite the security concerns, Sophie was allowed to accompany him, a rare privilege. As their motorcade drove through the streets, Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist, fired 2 shots. The first struck Sophie in the abdomen, killing her almost instantly. The second hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck, severing his jugular vein. His last words, whispered to Sophie as he lay dying, were, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children." Their assassinations ignited World War I, plunging Europe into a devastating conflict. But their deaths also cemented their legacy as a couple who defied an empire for love. Franz Ferdinand's insistence on marrying Sophie, against all convention and despite immense personal cost, remains one of the most powerful and enduring love stories of the Habsburg dynasty. It was a love that literally shaped the course of history, demonstrating that even in the most rigid of monarchies, the human heart can demand its own terms.